Welcome to the Fixit channel, and we are going to take a look at computer terminology and especially the gigahertz or megahertz, or depending on the speed it changes. What it means, basically, people were watching. I was showing this week in the task manager, how to go into the performance tab, check out CPU, and you got these numbers: 2.5 gigahertz, 1.3843, changes all the time here, gigahertz. And of course I got the regular questions. What does it mean exactly? So a CPU works by clock cycle. Typically, the more clock cycles you have, the more instructions every second the CPU can process. So example, my first computer, a Commodore 64, was at 1 megahertz. That's 1 million clock cycles. And the best of the best, it would be 1 million instructions every second. In the real world, it's not that. There are skipped cycles where the CPU is waiting for stuff. But technically, the faster the speed of the clock, the more instructions every second the CPU will be able to actually process. So technically, a 2 gigahertz processor, so a gigahertz is 1 billion cycles a second. So a 2 gigahertz processor, 2 billion cycles a second, processes less instructions every second than a 4 gigahertz processor. Now you might think, oh, 4 gigahertz processor is twice as fast as the 2 gigahertz processor. Actually, it's not like that. 4 gigahertz will be roughly 30% faster than 2 gigahertz, and maybe even slower on some types of processors, and depending on the computer itself. So don't be fooled into thinking that a change from 2 to 2.5 is necessarily noticeable on your computer. It might actually not be at all. And there's other things that happens in your computer that can actually make a computer faster. And even a computer that's slower can seem faster than another computer that is rated with a higher clock speed on the CPU. So technically, in a world that would be perfect, every cycle the CPU could handle 1 instruction. So meaning that in a 2 gigahertz computer, in a perfect world, you'd have 2 billion instructions a second that are processed. Now that looks like a lot, but remember that, for example, just showing that text that you see on your screen here, there's millions of instructions that the CPU needs to handle just to do that, plus millions of instructions that it needs to do to have the underlying operating system work. So you see that it's very relative. There's just so many instructions to handle today that the clock speed, even though that it is higher, has not necessarily given us computers that are much faster than in the past. But we do more things with our computers. In reality, if you take a 2 gigahertz processor, the CPU, will not handle 2 billion instructions a second. Why? Because the CPU is really fast, and your computer needs to do other tasks. So you know what? There are a lot of clock cycles that have no instructions. The CPU is just waiting for the computer to send it other instructions to handle. So in a typical 2 gigahertz processor, maybe half of the clock cycles are lost because the computer just can't keep up with that speed. It has too many things to do. Access the hard drive, which is slow compared to what the CPU can do. So there's a lot of things that typically can make skipped clock cycles. So think of it as a speed but don't go crazy on that speed. You know, some people want to overclock. Oh, I'm going to overclock my CPU from 3 to 3.5 gigahertz, going to go faster. Yeah, you're just getting 3% more speed. It doesn't show. We don't see a difference. So that's something that you need to understand also about the clock speed. Also, all CPUs are not created equal. You can have 3 different CPUs, an AMD, a Intel, and another type of Intel lower like a Celeron, all running at 2 gigahertz. They're not all at the same speed. They're not all going to process at the same speed. It's much more complex than that. You cannot just by on numbers know what speed the computer or the processor is going, because they're different processors and they don't handle that speed at the same pace. It's a very complex issue. So that's why we don't have to go too crazy over the gigahertz or the speed of the computer. Like I've explained, you can see a computer at 2 gigahertz that runs faster than a 4 gigahertz. And yes, there are 4 gigahertz computers that really are fast. It all comes down also to the motherboard. Motherboard where the CPU is, typically, you know, they haven't kept up in the speeds that are needed for the computer to really be fast. So gigahertz, megahertz, hertz, it's simply a speed. But like I said, don't believe manufacturers. They try to lure you into pretty much anything. And it isn't necessarily what it seems to be. Hope this let you understand a little more what gigahertz and what the speeds of CPUs mean. And hope you enjoyed this little series on terminology and the different terms we used in computers. If you enjoy my videos, please subscribe, give us thumbs up, and hopefully you enjoy our videos and will continue watching our channel.